I never imagined that the boy I carried for 9 months and raised with every bit of my soul would be the one to sign my death warrant. But as I sat in that cold, sterile room in the heart of Spain, it hit me that to Brandon, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a bank account waiting to be emptied out. Oh, and before I go on, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop it in the comments, won't you? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and honestly, it really does help us keep making more of these stories for you. All right, now where were we? My name's Margaret Harrison, and at 62, I truly thought I was entering the quiet autumn of my life after losing my dear husband, Arthur. We'd built such a lovely life in Phoenix, a testament to 40 years of hard work and being careful with our pennies that left me with a $2 million estate and a home just filled with memories. But let me back up here because you need to understand how I got to that terrible moment in Spain, sitting in that sterile room, realizing my own son wanted me dead. See, Arthur and I, we came from nothing. We both grew up in small towns in the Midwest, children of factory workers and farmers, people who knew what it meant to go without. We met in college, both of us there on scholarships, both working 2 jobs to afford books and rent. Arthur was studying engineering, and I was in business management, and we used to joke that between the two of us, we'd build an empire someday. We got married right after graduation in a tiny ceremony at the courthouse because we couldn't afford anything fancy. Our honeymoon was a weekend camping trip because that's all we could manage. But we were happy, Lord. We were happy. We had dreams and ambition and each other, and that felt like more than enough. Arthur got a job at a small engineering firm and I worked in accounting, and we saved every penny we could. Lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment for 5 years, drove used cars, packed our lunches every day. Our friends thought we were crazy, being so frugal when we both had decent jobs, but we had a plan. We wanted to start our own business, wanted to build something that was ours. Brandon came along about 3 years into our marriage. I was 26 years old, scared out of my mind about becoming a mother, but so excited too. Arthur cried when I told him, actual tears of joy running down his face. We fixed up the tiny 2nd bedroom in our apartment, painted it blue, filled it with second-hand furniture we refinished ourselves. Brandon was a beautiful baby, all chubby cheeks and bright eyes. Arthur used to come home from work and spend hours just holding him, talking to him about all the things they'd do together when he got bigger. We were good parents, I believe that. We read to Brandon every night, took him to the park, made sure he knew he was loved. But we also taught him the value of hard work, of saving, of not taking things for granted. Or at least, we tried to teach him those things. When Brandon was 5, Arthur and I finally had enough saved to start our business. We launched Harrison Engineering Solutions, specializing in custom design work for manufacturing facilities. It was just the 2 of us at first, working out of our spare bedroom while Brandon slept, taking any job we could get, building a reputation 1 project at a time. Those early years were brutal. There were months we weren't sure we'd make payroll, times we had to choose between replacing our broken-down car or investing in new equipment for the business. But we kept pushing, kept believing in what we were building, and slowly, it started to work. By the time Brandon was in middle school, Harrison Engineering Solutions had 15 employees and a real office. We were landing bigger contracts, making real money for the first time in our lives. We bought our first house, nothing fancy but ours, with a yard and 3 bedrooms. I cried the day we moved in, thinking about how far we'd come from that cramped apartment. Brandon grew up watching us build that business, seeing the long hours and the hard work and the sacrifice. We thought we were teaching him important lessons about dedication and perseverance. We thought he understood that success wasn't handed to you. It was earned through blood, sweat, and determination. Looking back now, I wonder if we got it wrong somehow. If Brandon saw all that work and thought it was about the money rather than the pride of building something. If he learned the wrong lessons from watching us. He was a good kid, or so we thought. Smart in school, involved in sports, popular with his friends. We gave him opportunities we never had. Nice clothes, a car when he turned 16, help with college expenses. We wanted him to have it easier than we did, wanted him to not have to struggle the way we had. Maybe that was our mistake. By the time Brandon graduated high school, Harrison Engineering Solutions was a multi-million-dollar operation. We had 50 employees, offices in 3 states, and contracts with some of the biggest manufacturing companies in the Southwest. Arthur and I were proud of what we'd built, but we never forgot where we came from. We still drove practical cars, still lived in that same house, still packed our lunches most days. The money was for security, for retirement, for making sure we'd never have to worry in our old age. Brandon went to college, got a degree in business management like I had. We paid his tuition, his room and board, his expenses. He graduated and came to work for the company, and Arthur was so happy about that. Said it meant everything we'd built would stay in the family, that Brandon would take over someday and carry on what we'd started. But Brandon didn't have the patience for building something slowly. He wanted results now, wanted the lifestyle he thought he deserved. He'd make suggestions about expanding too fast, taking on debt to grow quicker, and Arthur would have to explain why slow and steady had gotten us this far. I could see the frustration in Brandon's eyes, the resentment that we wouldn't just hand him the keys to the kingdom. He met Amber when he was 28. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, beautiful and charming, and always dressed in expensive clothes. They got engaged after 6 months, and I tried to be happy for Brandon, I really did. But something about Amber set my teeth on edge. She had this way of looking at our house, our cars, our whole life, like it was beneath her. Like she couldn't understand why people with money would choose to live so modestly. The wedding was enormous, way bigger than anything Arthur and I would have chosen. Amber's parents paid for most of it, thank goodness, because the price tag made me feel physically ill. 300 guests, a country club venue, a dress that cost more than our first car. Brandon and Amber seemed happy enough, moved into a condo in Scottsdale, started building their life together. We tried to stay close to them, invited them for dinners, offered to help if they needed anything. But there was always this distance, this sense that we weren't quite good enough for the life Amber thought they should be living. Arthur and I started talking about retirement about 5 years ago. We were both in our late 50s, had more money than we'd ever need, and the business was running smoothly. We promoted one of our long-time employees to CEO, stepped back into advisory roles, and started actually enjoying our lives. We traveled a bit, spent time with friends, took up hobbies we'd never had time for before. It was everything we'd worked for, the reward for all those years of sacrifice. Then, 3 years ago, Arthur started having chest pains. He ignored them at first. Typical Arthur, always putting things off, always saying he was fine. But I made him go to the doctor, and they found the blockages. Severe coronary artery disease, the doctor said. Arthur needed bypass surgery, needed it soon. The surgery went well, or so they told us. Arthur came through it fine, was recovering right on schedule. But then, 2 days after the surgery, he had a massive stroke. Just like that, in the middle of the night in his hospital bed, my husband of 38 years was gone. I was devastated. We'd built everything together, dreamed together, suffered together, succeeded together. Arthur was my partner in every sense of the word, and losing him felt like losing half of myself. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't imagine how I was supposed to go on without him. Brandon and Amber were there for the funeral, of course. Brandon cried at the service, gave a nice eulogy about his father, seemed genuinely grieving. But I noticed things even through my own grief. The way Brandon kept asking about the estate, about Arthur's will, about what happened to the business now. The way Amber would pull him aside for whispered conversations. Then they'd both look at me with these calculating expressions. Arthur had left everything to me in his will, the house, the investments, his share of the business, everything. It was worth about $2 million total, and it would all go to Brandon when I died. That was always the plan, that Brandon would inherit everything. We'd set it up that way because he was our only child, our only family. We trusted him to take care of what we'd built. In the months after Arthur died, Brandon and Amber started coming around more. At first I thought it was because they cared, because they were worried about me being alone. They'd take me to dinner, invite me to their place, call to check on me. Amber would talk about how I needed to take care of myself, how the grief was taking a toll, how I should consider getting away for a while. They spoke about this luxury spa retreat in Barcelona, a place for healing and peace where I could find myself again. Said they'd been researching grief retreats, and this place, the Serenity Wellness Center, was supposed to be the best. They showed me the website, beautiful photos of a Mediterranean villa, descriptions of therapy and meditation and healing treatments. Said I deserved to treat myself, that Arthur would want me to take care of myself. I was hesitant at first. I'd never been much of a traveler, and going all the way to Spain by myself seemed overwhelming. But Brandon and Amber were so insistent, so caring. Said they'd arrange everything, handle all the details. All I had to do was show up. They even offered to come with me for the first few days to help me get settled. I was so touched by their worry, so grateful that my son cared enough to arrange this for me. I never dreamed that the Serenity Wellness Center was actually a gilded cage meant to make people like me disappear. We flew to Barcelona on a Tuesday. Brandon and Amber had booked us all first-class tickets, which should have been my first clue that something was off. Brandon was usually so careful with money, always looking for deals and discounts, but I thought maybe they were just trying to make the trip special for me, to honor Arthur's memory by treating me well. The facility was beautiful, I'll give them that. A converted villa in the hills outside Barcelona, with stunning views of the Mediterranean and grounds that looked like something out of a magazine. Dr. Martinez, the director, greeted us personally, all warmth and sympathy. He told me how sorry he was for my loss, how they specialized in helping people process grief and trauma, how I'd be in the best possible hands. They showed me to my room, spacious and elegant, with a private bathroom and a balcony overlooking the gardens. It seemed perfect, exactly what they'd promised. Brandon and Amber stayed in a suite down the hall, said they'd be there for a few days to make sure I was comfortable before heading back to Phoenix. That first day was lovely. We had a nice dinner, walked the grounds, and I started to think maybe this had been a good idea after all. Maybe getting away from the empty house, from all the memories of Arthur, was exactly what I needed. The betrayal happened over a breakfast of fresh fruit and pastries on our second day in Spain. We were sitting on a terrace overlooking the gardens, morning sun warming the tiles, and I thought we were just going to plan out my day. Then Brandon's whole demeanor changed. He couldn't even look me in the eye as he slid a stack of papers across the table. His voice totally cold, as he told me they'd talked to experts and decided I wasn't able to manage my own life. I stared at him, not understanding what he was saying. He said I'd been showing signs of confusion and memory loss since Arthur died, that I'd made some concerning financial decisions, that they were worried about my safety. Amber, with a look of fake pity that I can still see clear as day, patted my hand and said, "It was for my own safety, that early dementia was making me a danger to myself." I looked at those papers and saw they were guardianship documents, giving Brandon complete control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, everything. And there, at the bottom, was the signature of Dr. Marcus Webb, our family physician back in Arizona. He'd written a psychiatric evaluation stating that I showed clear signs of dementia and was no longer competent to manage my own affairs. The note was dated 3 days before we even left the States. They'd planned it all. I tried to argue, told them this was insane, that there was nothing wrong with me. I'd been sad, yes, grieving my husband, but that didn't mean I was incompetent. Brandon just shook his head, said denial was a common symptom, that Dr. Webb had explained this might happen. When I tried to stand, to walk away from this nightmare, 2 big orderlies appeared from behind a curtain, like they'd been waiting there the whole time. They grabbed my arms, gentle but firm, and Dr. Martinez appeared with that same sympathetic smile. He told me I was being placed under protective care according to Spanish law, that as a foreign national exhibiting signs of mental incompetence, I could be held at the facility until proper arrangements were made. I looked at Brandon, my son, the baby I'd carried and raised and loved with everything in me, and begged him not to do this, told him we could talk about it, figure something out, that he didn't need to lock me up like some kind of criminal. Brandon looked at me then, his eyes cold and greedy in a way I'd never seen before, and told me he'd be taking over the estate and I should get comfortable because I wasn't going home. Then he and Amber left, just walked out of that terrace, got into a car, and drove away. The orderlies took my phone and passport, led me back to my room, and locked the door from the outside. I sat on that beautiful bed in that beautiful room and realized I was a prisoner, thousands of miles from home, with no way to contact anyone, no way to escape. They'd trapped me, and they'd done it legally, with forged documents and complicit doctors and the weight of international law. They left me there, thinking they'd broken a confused old lady. What they didn't know was that Arthur and I hadn't built a huge business by being soft. We'd fought through recessions and losses and setbacks that would have destroyed weaker people. I'd negotiated million-dollar contracts, managed complicated projects, outmaneuvered competitors who underestimated me. I wasn't some helpless old woman, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let my own son steal everything Arthur and I had built. The shock lasted an hour, maybe 2. I let myself feel it, let myself cry and rage and grieve for the son I thought I'd raised. Then I dried my tears, looked around that locked room, and started planning. I turned it into a burning resolve right then. If Brandon wanted to play games, wanted to treat me like an enemy instead of his mother, then that's exactly what he'd get. I started my act right then, playing the role they expected. When the nurse came in with pills, sedatives, she said, to help with my anxiety, I took them obediently and tucked them under my tongue. The moment she left, I spat them out and hid them in a hole I'd found behind the baseboard. When they asked me questions, I'd answer slowly, sometimes repeating myself, sometimes pretending to forget what we'd been talking about. I'd wander the halls with a blank stare, nodding when the nurses spoke, shuffling along like I was medicated and confused. But my mind stayed sharp, recording every detail. The shift changes, the security procedures, the layout of the building, the other patients, and their stories. I learned to hide the heavy pills they tried to force down my throat, perfected the art of seeming compliant while staying completely alert. Every night, I spat them into that hole behind the baseboard, watched my collection of sedatives grow, and planned. I soon realized I wasn't the only one trapped there. The Serenity Wellness Center had about 15 patients, all of them elderly, all of them from wealthy families, all of them supposedly suffering from dementia or other cognitive issues. But when I'd catch them in unguarded moments, I'd see clarity in their eyes, fear and awareness. We were all prisoners, all being held against our will, while our families looted our estates. There was an elderly man named Thomas, who'd been there for 3 years, his daughter collecting his pension and social security the whole time. A woman named Patricia, whose son had committed her, so he could sell her house and keep the money. We were all victims of the same scam, all trapped in this beautiful prison, while our own children destroyed everything we'd built. I needed a friend, someone on the inside who could help me. And I found one in Maria Santos, a quiet janitor who worked the evening shift. I watched her for weeks before I made my move, noticed how she looked at us patients with pity, how she'd sometimes slip an extra blanket to someone who was cold, or bring treats from the kitchen. She had kind eyes, and I decided to trust her. I started leaving little bits of jewelry I'd hidden in my bags for her. A bracelet, some earrings, a necklace. Nothing too expensive, nothing that would draw attention, but enough to show I appreciated her. After about a week of this, Maria came to my room during her shift and asked me quietly why I was giving her these things. I told her the truth, told her I wasn't sick, wasn't confused, that I'd been trapped here by my son who wanted to steal my money, told her I needed help, needed information, needed someone on the outside who could be my eyes and ears. Maria looked at me for a long time, and I could see her making a decision. Then she nodded and said she'd help me however she could, and she started bringing me news from the outside world. Maria told me that Dr. Martinez was being paid thousands in fees by families to keep patients like me locked up indefinitely, that he had connections with lawyers and judges in Spain who'd rubber stamp whatever documents he needed, that the facility was basically a prison for wealthy elderly people whose families had decided they were worth more dead or incompetent than alive and free. But the real horror came when Maria snuck in my file one night, risking her job to show me what they'd been hiding. Tucked in the back, behind all the fake medical evaluations and guardianship papers, was a life insurance policy I didn't know existed. A $1.5 million policy on my life, taken out 6 months before Arthur died, with Brandon listed as the sole beneficiary. The policy had a clause for natural death while traveling abroad, meaning if I died here in Spain, Brandon would collect the full amount. No questions asked. Brandon wasn't just stealing the house and the investments and the business. He was waiting for me to die so he could collect one last payday. And given the amount of sedatives they were trying to pump into me, given my age and the stress I was under, it probably wouldn't take very long. That was the moment Margaret the victim died, and Margaret the strategist was born. I'd been thinking about escape, about finding a way to call for help or alert the authorities. But now I understood the full scope of what Brandon had planned, and I knew I needed to do more than just escape. I needed to burn this whole operation down and make sure everyone involved paid for what they'd done. I spent a week watching the guards, learning their routines down to the minute. I noticed which ones were lazy, which ones were thorough, where the blind spots in their coverage were. I saw that the laundry room exit had a sensor that would trigger an alarm if the door opened, but the sensor was old and poorly maintained. If I could bypass it with electrical tape in just the right spot, I could slip out without anyone knowing. I also noticed that the guards did their final rounds at 1:30 a.m., then settled in the security office to watch monitors for the rest of their shift. Between 2 and 5 in the morning, the actual physical presence in the halls was minimal. That was my window. On a rainy Tuesday at 2 in the morning, I made my move. I'd been pretending to sleep when the guards did their rounds, waited until I heard their footsteps fade away, then got dressed in the darkest clothes I had. With Maria's help, she'd left the laundry room unlocked and the electrical tape in place. I slipped out of my room, moved through the silent halls like a ghost, and made it to the laundry room. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away, but my hands were steady as I applied the tape to the sensor exactly how Maria had shown me. The door opened silently, and I stepped out into the rainy Barcelona night, free for the first time in 6 weeks. I didn't go to the police right away, even though every instinct told me to. Maria had warned me that Dr. Martinez had friends in the local police, that he'd probably paid off enough people that I'd just end up right back at the facility if I went to them first. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I found an all-night internet cafe about 2 miles from the facility, walked there in the rain, soaking wet and exhausted, but free. I used the money I'd hidden in my bra, €300 Maria had helped me exchange from American bills I'd tucked into my luggage, to buy computer time. Then I logged into my secret email account, the one Arthur and I had set up years ago for emergency access to our financial accounts. Brandon didn't know about it, because we'd created it before he was even born, back when we were first building the business and needed secure ways to access our information from anywhere. Everything was still there. All my passwords, all my account information, all the documentation of our estate. I could see that Brandon had already started the process of taking control. He'd filed the guardianship papers in Arizona, was in the process of transferring assets into his name, had even put the house on the market. But he hadn't finished yet, probably because some of the paperwork required time to process through the courts. I still had a window to fight back. I found Dr. Carmen Ruiz online, a high-powered international lawyer I'd met once at a business conference years ago. I sent her an email explaining my situation, attached copies of the forged guardianship documents Maria had photographed for me, and begged for help. Then I sent a detailed message to the American consulate in Barcelona, explaining that I was an American citizen being held against my will at a medical facility, that my son had committed fraud to trap me there, and that I needed immediate assistance. By sunrise, I was sitting in Dr. Ruiz's office, showing her the forged papers, the insurance policy, and the list of other victims Maria had helped me compile. Carmen took one look at everything and made 3 phone calls, one to the American consulate, one to the Spanish authorities, and one to the FBI field office in Phoenix. She told me that what Brandon and Dr. Martinez were running was an international criminal enterprise, that I wasn't just a victim, but a potential witness in a much larger case, and that she was going to make sure everyone involved spent a very long time in prison. The wheels of justice started turning fast after that. The Spanish police, working with FBI agents who flew in from the States, raided the Serenity Wellness Center 2 days later. They found 15 elderly patients being held against their will, millions of dollars in fraudulent guardianship documents, and evidence of at least 8 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years. Dr. Martinez was arrested on the spot, along with 3 of his staff members, who'd been complicit in the scheme. When Brandon and Amber came back 3 days later to sign the final guardianship papers and probably start planning my funeral, they expected to find a shell of a woman, drugged and compliant, and ready to fade away. Instead, they walked into Dr. Martinez's office to find me sitting in his chair, very much alive and very much in control, with Spanish police and FBI agents standing behind me. The look of pure terror on Brandon's face when I stood up and asked if he'd enjoyed spending my money was the best moment of my life. Watching him realize that his perfect plan had fallen apart, that his mother had outsmarted him, that he was about to lose everything, that was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. Amber started crying immediately, those same fake tears she'd cried when she told me I had dementia. Brandon tried to run, actually bolted for the door, but the agents grabbed him before he made it 2 steps. They read him his rights right, there in that office, and I watched my son, my only child, the baby I'd loved and raised and sacrificed for, get handcuffed and led away like a common criminal. But as the law started their investigation and swept through Brandon's life, we found something even darker. Brandon's laptop, which the FBI seized as evidence, showed he wasn't working alone. He was part of a network, a business that specialized in what they called elder resolution. They had a whole organization set up, with lawyers and doctors and facilities in 3 different countries, all working together to trap wealthy elderly people and steal their assets. The network called itself Golden Years Consulting, and they operated like a well-oiled machine. They'd identify targets, usually widows or widowers with substantial assets and children willing to betray them for money. They'd provide the corrupt doctors to write the fake evaluations, the lawyers to file the guardianship papers, the facilities to hold the victims. They even had people who'd help arrange accidents if a victim was taking too long to die naturally. They were a business that specialized in complete resolution, a scary word for killing off wealthy seniors and helping their families inherit early. The FBI had been watching them for years, but couldn't get enough evidence to take them down. They needed an insider, someone who could testify to the full scope of the operation. I looked at Agent Linda Cooper, the lead investigator on the case, and said I wasn't done fighting. I told her I wanted to help take down everyone involved, wanted to make sure no other family went through what I'd been through. And that's when she asked me to do something I never expected, go undercover. They set up a new identity for me, Eleanor Blackwood, a wealthy widow from California whose husband had recently died and left her a fortune. They created bank accounts, a backstory, even a fake obituary for my husband. The goal was to approach Golden Years, consulting as a new client, to get them to lay out their whole operation on tape, to gather evidence that could be used to dismantle the entire network. I went back to Arizona not as Margaret Harrison, victim, but as Eleanor Blackwood, target. I wore a wire and a hidden camera, played the part of a lonely, confused widow perfectly. It helped that I'd spent 6 weeks watching how they expected victims to act, how they manipulated and controlled vulnerable people. We set the trap in Scottsdale, at a nice restaurant where Golden Years Consulting liked to meet potential clients. I sat down with the regional directors, including Dr. Marcus Webb, our family physician, who'd written that fake evaluation of me. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd dyed my hair, wore different glasses, carried myself differently. When recognition finally dawned in his eyes about halfway through dinner, I watched the color drain from his face. But by then it was too late. I'd already gotten him, and his partners, to lay out the whole operation. They told Eleanor how it worked, the fake medical evaluations, the guardianship proceedings, the facilities in Spain and Mexico and Thailand where they'd warehouse victims. They explained the fee structure, showed me the paperwork I'd need to sign to commit my fictional sister to their care. They even discussed the life insurance policies, how much extra it would cost to arrange one that would pay out for natural death abroad. And Brandon, out on bail and not knowing I was working with the feds, actually participated in the meeting. His lawyer had told him not to talk about the case, but greed made him stupid. When they mentioned they had a prime candidate, a wealthy mother who'd recently been resolved, Brandon jumped in to brag about how smoothly my case had gone, how he'd managed to get me committed in Spain, and would have collected the insurance payout if I hadn't, unfortunately, escaped due to staff negligence, recorded every word of their confession, every detail of the crimes they'd committed, every victim they'd destroyed, sat there acting like a potential client, while my son and his accomplices bragged about trying to kill me for money. When the FBI teams moved in, surrounding the restaurant and moving through it like a SWAT operation, I stood up and took off my wig, looked my son right in the eye as the cuffs clicked around his wrists for the second time, told him that this was for Arthur, for all the years we'd worked to build something good, for the trust he'd betrayed. Brandon begged for mercy, tears streaming down his face, crying about debt and pressure and how Amber had pushed him into it. But I felt only justice, cold and pure. The whole network was torn down over the next 6 months. The FBI arrested 43 people across 4 countries, shut down 6 facilities holding a total of 78 elderly victims, and recovered over $30 million in stolen assets. They found evidence of 26 suspicious deaths that were being investigated as potential murders, including 2 victims at the Barcelona facility who died shortly before I arrived. Brandon got 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Amber got 15 years as an accomplice. Dr. Marcus Webb and the other doctors involved got life sentences. Turns out deliberately harming elderly patients in your care is taken very seriously by the justice system. Dr. Martinez and his staff in Spain got similar sentences under Spanish law. The network's leaders, the ones who'd built the whole operation, got multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. I testified at every trial, sat in court for weeks, watching these people try to justify what they'd done. Some of them claimed they were just helping families deal with difficult situations. Others said the elderly victims were going to die soon anyway, so what did it matter? One lawyer actually argued that people like me should be grateful for facilities like the Serenity Wellness Center because we were being kept safe and comfortable. I looked each one of them in the eye as they were sentenced and felt nothing but satisfaction. I sold the Phoenix house. It had too many shadows, too many memories of Brandon and Arthur, and the life I'd thought I had. Couldn't bear to live there anymore, knowing my son had been willing to kill me to inherit it early. The business? Harrison Engineering Solutions. I sold to the employees through an ESOP plan. They'd been loyal to Arthur and me for years, and they deserved to own what they'd helped build. Today, I live in a villa by the sea, just a few miles from where I was a prisoner in Barcelona. I bought it with some of the money from selling the Phoenix house, wanted to reclaim the place where I'd been victimized and turn it into something beautiful. Every morning, I walk on the beach and watch the sunrise over the Mediterranean, and I think about Arthur. I think about how we built something good together, how we trusted the wrong person with our legacy, but how in the end, justice prevailed. I've used my money to start a non-profit organization called the Harrison Foundation for Elder Protection. We work internationally to identify and shut down operations like Golden Years Consulting, provide legal assistance to families dealing with guardianship abuse, and educate elderly people about the warning signs that their loved ones might be trying to exploit them. We've saved dozens of people from situations like mine, prevented countless thefts and abuses. Maria Santos works for the foundation now as our director of operations in Spain. Turns out her kindness in helping me wasn't just about the jewelry I'd given her. Her own grandmother had been victimized by a similar scheme years ago, and Maria had been looking for a way to fight back. Together, we've built something that Arthur would be proud of, something that honors his memory better than any monument or inheritance ever could. I walk the shore every morning, feeling the sun and the peace of a life I earned back through courage and determination. I've made friends here in Barcelona, people who know my story and respect what I survived. I've learned Spanish, joined a book club, started painting. I've built a new life that's entirely mine, untainted by betrayal or grief. Sometimes people ask me if I regret having Brandon, if I wish I'd never had children since my only child tried to kill me. And I tell them no, I don't regret it, because Brandon's betrayal taught me something important, that love and family aren't about blood. They're about loyalty and trust and mutual respect, that I'm stronger than I ever knew, that I can survive anything and come out the other side ready to fight for justice. Do I miss the son I thought I had? Of course. I grieve for the little boy with chubby cheeks who used to crawl into bed with us on Sunday mornings, for the teenager who'd ask Arthur's advice about everything, for the young man I thought would carry on our legacy. But that boy never really existed. The real Brandon was always there, always calculating, always waiting for his chance to cash in. I just loved him too much to see it. Justice isn't revenge. It's fixing the balance that greed breaks. It's about making sure that predators face consequences, that victims get protection, that the vulnerable are defended. That's what I wake up every day trying to do now, and it gives my life a purpose that goes beyond money or property or any of the things I used to think mattered. If you liked this tale, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me what you think below. To hear the next one, just click the box on the left. And if you or someone you love is elderly and vulnerable, please be careful. Watch for the warning signs. Family members who suddenly take too much interest in finances, who push for guardianship or power of attorney, who isolate you from friends and support systems. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't wait until you're trapped in a facility thousands of miles from home to realize that the people you trusted most are the ones trying to destroy you. Fight back early, fight back hard, and never let anyone convince you that you're too old or too confused to know what's happening to you. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve better than cruelty and betrayal. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there, gives them the courage to fight back or the wisdom to protect themselves. And remember, it's never too late for justice.